Hi guys, last video I asked you to work on this question. So let's see what you got. What did you say happens in each area? The proximal convoluted tubule, the loop of Henle, distal convoluted tubule, collecting duct. As a result of having a lot of glucose, a lot of water, right? The soda is just water and glucose and other junk, preservatives, colors, etc. Okay, so we're mostly focused on the glucose, the water from the soda, and then the high sodium in the popcorn. Okay, so how's that going to affect the function at each of these places? So let's look at that. Consumption of salt and water. So why are we not including glucose? Well, remember, unless you're diabetic, you're going to absorb all of your glucose. You're going to reabsorb all of the glucose. So your function at the proximal convoluted tubule doesn't change. You are still going to absorb 65% of the sodium. Of course, 65% of a larger amount of sodium is a lot more sodium, right? So we'll see an effect later on. We're still going to absorb water as usual and all of the glucose, okay? So that doesn't change. PCT, proximal convoluted tubule, stays the same. Next, descending loop also stays the same. You're only permeable to water in the descending loop of Henle, remember? So water's reabsorbed as usual. Ascending loop is only permeable to sodium and chloride follows, right? And you'll get 25% there. So far, everything's identical. Now we get to the fun part. Normally, you have 10% reabsorption of sodium in the distal convoluted tubule, but you already absorbed so much sodium in your proximal convoluted tubule that we don't want any more. So if you've had that much sodium, you should have released aldosterone to control the distal convoluted tubule not to reabsorb sodium. So you're going to decrease aldosterone so that you inhibit your sodium reabsorption. So I know I said that a second ago, it sounded confusing. Let's repeat that. So you've had a bunch of sodium in your popcorn. You've already reabsorbed a bunch up here in this first step. So now you don't need as much. So normally in the distal convoluted tubule, you reabsorb 10%, but we're going to decrease our aldosterone levels so that we don't absorb the full 10%. So the more you decrease aldosterone, the less you'll absorb, right? So a decrease in aldosterone will inhibit sodium reabsorption. Next, you have another hormone, right? You have your atrial natriuretic factor, right? And these levels are going to increase because you need to get rid of the excess sodium, right? So you're going to increase your ANF, atrial natriuretic factor, to actually get rid of sodium. So decrease your aldosterone so you don't reabsorb it, and then increase your ANF level so you can actually get rid of the excess sodium. Okay, so that's the first major change. It's actually the first change period, and it's two major changes. Then lastly, in your collecting duct, you're going to decrease ADH so that you don't absorb as much water, and that is unrelated to your sodium problem. You're releasing excess water because you just drank a huge volume of water. But also, it makes sense when you think about the sodium because you're secreting sodium and water follows the salt, right? So both because of the sodium, but also because you just drink a bunch of soda, you're going to eliminate all that extra water, right? So ADH, you're going to decrease ADH so you don't reabsorb the water. Okay. Good job, guys. I know you did it. Okay, so this is just showing what was typed on that your proximal tubule stays the same, right? Your descending loop stays the same. Your ascending loop stays the same. And where do the changes take place? They take place in the distal tubule and the collecting duct. They didn't put convoluted. I guess it takes up too much space, but you guys know it's proximal convoluted tubule. Function stays the same. And the distal convoluted tubule is where we make our changes to aldosterone and the atrial natriuretic factor. Okay, the collecting duct, we also make changes to the amount of ADH so that we can control how much water we reabsorb. Okay. So now we're going to talk about plasma clearance, and this refers to how much of a substance you remove from the plasma. So recall our GFR is 125, right? So that's how much plasma you filter per minute, right? That's the GFR, 125 mils, okay? And 124 of those milliliters are reabsorbed, right? So each minute you lose about 1 mil, right? Now, getting back to clearance. So volume of plasma completely cleared of a particular substance. So out of this 125 mils, or really 124, how much is completely free of a particular substance? And this is going to be different for each individual substance, okay? So it tells us how much plasma is cleaned of that substance, which then helps evaluate the kidney function, okay? So if your plasma clearance is equal to your GFR, if it's 125 mils per minute, that means the substance has been completely filtered out. Substance is not reabsorbed. The substance is not secreted, okay? An example, inulin. Don't mix this up with insulin, please. It's inulin is a plant carbohydrate, and this is a good marker to measure GFR because we know that it should be completely filtered. Creatinine, remember that? We talked about that a little bit ago. Creatinine from the breakdown of creatine phosphate is another good measure for GFR and kidney function because it also is completely cleared. Okay. If your plasma clearance is less than your GFR, which is probably most other things, okay? Example, urea. Okay, so the substance is filtered and is reabsorbed. The substance is not secreted, okay? So it's filtered in Bowman's capsule and part of it's reabsorbed. Okay, so remember we talked about urea. It's from the breakdown of proteins, amino acids. It's your nitrogen waste. We do reabsorb about half of it. Okay, so the urea clearance is 75 mils per minute. Glucose, you reabsorb all glucose, right? If you have normal, healthy functioning kidneys. So your glucose clearance is 0 because you reabsorbed it all. So it's all going back into your plasma, right? All going back into your blood. All right, plasma clearance greater than GFR, that means the substance is filtered, is not reabsorbed, and you also add more of it by secretion, right? So example of that is our proton, our hydrogen. This is, again, remember, this is how we maintain our constant, it's part of how we maintain our constant pH of our blood, okay? So the clearance is actually higher than GFR, it's 150. Of course, this number changes. It's constantly changing. As you change your blood pH, we adjust this to keep our blood pH constant. So I'd say on average, it's 150 mils per minute, but it's always in flux. Okay, so action of diuretics. So I know you guys learned about, we talked about diuretics, and we also talked about our ACE inhibitors in lab. So the ACE inhibitors are a special type, is separate from our diuretics. So diuretics can target different areas. Diuretics can target, we have about one kind that can target our proximal convoluted tubule. Okay, then in our descending limb, we don't see any. And our ascending, we see some loop diuretics controlling how much sodium you're able to pump back out. And what is that going to do? If you pump out less sodium, you're not going to lose as much water here, which means you're going to urinate more water. So that makes sense, right? We could also target the distal convoluted tubule, right? Same idea. In fact, if you look, all of these are controlling how much sodium is leaving, which then controls how much water leaves, right? So if you let out less sodium, then you're not going to be able to get rid of as much water, and you're going to have more water in your filtrate, and that means more urine, right? More urine volume. Okay, we also have diuretics that can target the collecting duct. Okay, I'm not going to ask you anything specific about like these names of the types of diuretics, okay? But what, in general, what are they doing? They're either restricting, well, they're always restricting how much sodium is exiting the filtrate, which the byproduct of that is less water reabsorption, which means there's more water in your filtrate, more water in your urine, more urine volume, okay? So why would you take a diuretic? Why would you want that? So patients who are hypertensive or congestive heart failure, or they have edema. So they're retaining too much fluid, or their blood pressure is too high. In either case, we need to decrease our blood volume so that we can get rid of this extra strain on the heart, get rid of this extra water, the swelling, right? And so then you need to get rid of water, right? So decrease your water reabsorption by decreasing your sodium reabsorption, okay? And again, mainly the different types of diuretics are going to target the ascending limb of the loop of Henle, the distal convoluted tubule, and the collecting duct, but all the same mechanism. Decrease the amount of sodium reabsorption so you get less water reabsorption. That's going to decrease your blood volume, it's going to increase your urine volume, and overall decrease your blood pressure, which is the goal, right? Okay, so renal diseases, you can have acute renal failure. What's acute means sudden, short term, right? So when you get a cold, a flu, those are acute illnesses, right? If you had HIV, that would be chronic, okay? So acute renal failure, you're going to have reduced urine formation, and it's reversible, right? It's temporary, it's acute. But don't think that that's not important, right? There are plenty of acute things that if they're not treated can kill you, right? So it is still serious, it's still a problem, but it is reversible. Chronic renal failure, you have destruction of the cells and you're not going to get it back. Slow, takes time. In fact, you don't even usually know that there's even a problem until you get 75% destruction of the kidney renal failure, okay? End-stage renal failure, you only have about 10% of your kidney function. That's not enough to take care of your blood. So now you're going to have dialysis. And dialysis is 2 to 3 times a week. Excuse me. Depending on how severe the kidney failure is, it'll be 2 to 3 times a week. I believe it can take up to 4 hours per session. So it takes a lot of time. People go in feeling swollen and gross. They have all these toxins. They're not doing well. Then they leave feeling refreshed and much better. Why do people do dialysis? Because it's really, really hard to get a transplant, right? There's not enough matches out there, right? So there's not enough kidneys being donated, and then of those being donated, you need to find a perfect match, and you need to be a good candidate. Not everyone is healthy enough to undergo that kind of procedure in the first place. Okay, so pretty sad, but also very amazing that we can replace the function of the kidneys with a machine. The machine's about the size of a large mini fridge. Again, 2 to 4 hours per cycle, 2 to 3 times a week. So let's be thankful for our functioning kidneys and take care of them, right? Don't drink energy drinks. This is terrible. People have had renal failure because of those. Okay. You can also have swelling of your Bowman's capsule, and that's glomerular nephritis. Nephritis, ritis is inflammation. Nephritis refers to the kidney, and then we're being more specific. The specific area of the kidney is the Bowman's capsule. Okay, this can happen for lots of reasons. You can have an infection. You can have an autoimmune disease. Okay. These are going to result in inflammation, and inflammation of the glomerulus is going to allow larger substances to get filtered, right, that wouldn't normally. And so the main way that we would be aware of this issue and diagnose it would be by protein in the urine, right? We shouldn't have protein in the urine. It's too big. Okay, I think that might be it. So that's the end of our renal chapter. I know it's tough. Re-watch it, write down, keep track of all your hormones and what are they doing, and also review your lab. That's helpful too. Okay, I will see you guys on Monday. Have a wonderful break.